He lived a quiet life in a small, peaceful neighborhood where everyone knew each other. His house was modest but well kept, with a small garden in the front and a porch that caught the morning sunlight. Neighbors would wave at him as they went to work, and children would sometimes run by laughing, chasing after balls or bicycles. Life was calm, predictable, and ordinary, just the way he liked it. He liked routine, the small comforts that most people took for granted. A hot cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside his window, the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening. It was a life that felt safe, a life he had chosen after leaving behind years of chaos he would never speak of. He worked a simple job, one that allowed him to interact with people but did not demand too much attention or energy. He was friendly with coworkers, polite with strangers, and had built a network of people who trusted and respected him. Yet, despite his calm exterior, there was something about him that made people feel secure. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, quiet but confident, always observing but never intrusive. His neighbors saw him as a kind and steady presence, someone they could rely on if anything ever went wrong. One night, as he sat on his porch with a mug of tea, he noticed a car slowly driving past his house. At first he thought it was just a neighbor returning home late. But something felt off. The car circled the block, moving slowly, deliberately, its headlights scanning the street. He felt a flicker of unease, but he did not panic. He had a careful way of noticing things that others might miss, a habit that had kept him alive in situations he would never tell anyone about. Still, he reminded himself that it was probably nothing. Maybe someone was just lost, maybe it was coincidence. Hours later, he heard a crash that shattered the calm of his night. Glass flew across the porch and into the yard, sparkling in the dim streetlight. He ran inside, heart pounding, to find the front window smashed. The room smelled of broken glass and something more sinister. Fear. He could see the outline of a figure retreating down the street, but it was too dark to make out details. His mind raced, trying to understand why this had happened. Was it a robbery? A random act of vandalism? Or something worse? Stepping outside, he found spray-painted threats on the walls, messages meant to intimidate and frighten. The words were cruel, hateful, and shocking in their boldness. He looked around, seeing no one, yet feeling watched. Fear settled in for a moment, and he allowed himself to feel the anger, the injustice. How could anyone do this to someone who had never wronged them? He wanted to act immediately to chase the attackers down, but he stopped himself. There was a reason he had learned patience, control, and strategy. Acting in the heat of the moment would not help. It would only put him at risk, and that was not the answer. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People came to check on him, some expressing sympathy, others shock. No one could understand why anyone would target his house. Some assumed it was a mistake, a misdirected act of violence. But deep down, he knew it was intentional. He had seen hatred before in places he would rather forget, and he could recognize its quiet, simmering presence. Yet he said nothing to anyone, smiling politely, explaining that he would handle it. They had no idea that the man standing there, calm and composed, was not an ordinary man at all. He spent the day cleaning up the mess, gathering shards of glass, and repairing what could be repaired. His movements were methodical, almost meditative. It was not just about fixing the house. It was about regaining control over the chaos that had been imposed on his life. As he worked, he reflected on the strange irony of his situation. He had spent years training for situations far more dangerous than this, facing enemies who sought to kill him with skill and precision. Yet here he was, facing a group of individuals who believed they could intimidate him with threats and vandalism, unaware of the man they were provoking. Despite the anger and the fear, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The attack was not just about the house. It was about testing him, trying to see if he could be broken, and he realized in that quiet moment that he had been preparing for life's challenges long before this night. He had learned discipline, focus, and resilience in environments far harsher than this one. He had learned to control his emotions, to assess situations logically, and to act decisively when the time was right. This was no different, except that now he had to protect more than just himself. He had to protect his home, his community, and the life he had built. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he looked out over the street. He noticed neighbors returning to their homes, some curious, some wary, all whispering about what had happened. He understood their fear, but he also felt a sense of responsibility. This neighborhood was his home, and he would not allow it to be taken by fear or hatred. He made a silent promise to himself that he would not be intimidated, that he would respond but on his own terms. That night, sleep was elusive. His mind replayed the events, analyzing every detail, every shadow, every movement he had noticed. He knew the gang would strike again if they sensed weakness. They were not acting randomly. They were testing boundaries, pushing to see how far they could go. He allowed himself only a brief moment of rest before returning to a state of alert awareness. This was not paranoia. It was preparation. He knew that the calm, ordinary life he had built could not be shattered by chaos if he remained focused. He thought back to earlier days, to years spent in intense training, missions where failure was not an option, where any mistake could cost lives. He remembered the feeling of discipline, the clarity that came from knowing he was in control of himself, even when surrounded by danger. That training, those experiences, had shaped him into someone who could face threats calmly and strategically. And now, he realized, those same skills would be essential in protecting his home and his community. He did not boast, and he did not threaten. To anyone passing by, he appeared as the same calm, ordinary man. But beneath that surface was a readiness, a hidden strength that no one could see. He understood the value of restraint, of using intelligence rather than force at the wrong time. He knew that reacting with anger or panic would only escalate the situation. Patience, observation, and planning were his tools now, just as they had been before. As the days went by, he quietly began to gather information. He noticed patterns in the streetlights, the timing of passing cars, the way shadows moved along the fences. He did not confront anyone yet. He simply observed, cataloged, and prepared. Each small detail could make a difference. Each moment of patience was a step toward regaining control. He found a strange sense of satisfaction in this methodical approach, in knowing that he had not lost control, that the situation was still within his power to influence. Neighbors slowly started to notice small changes. He became more vigilant, more present on the streets in the evenings, always polite, always approachable, but clearly aware. Some people felt reassured by his presence. Others could sense the quiet intensity that lay beneath. No one could guess the truth, that this man who smiled and nodded at passers-by had faced far greater dangers than any gang could pose. His calmness was not ignorance. It was experience, and it was preparation. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but he knew the peace was fragile. The attackers had left a mark, a warning, and he understood that they would not stop unless he showed them he could not be intimidated. Yet he remained calm, patient, and deliberate, knowing that how he responded would define what came next. The quiet man they thought they knew was not ordinary at all. He had survived challenges most people could not imagine. And now, even in the face of this new threat, he was ready. He spent the evening on his porch again, the mug of tea warming his hands, watching the street, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. The wind rustled the leaves, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. Life went on as it always did, but he felt a sense of determination settle in his chest. This was his home, his life, and he would protect it with intelligence, with patience, and if necessary, with skill born from a lifetime of training. He was calm, he was focused, and he was ready. The night grew darker, but he did not feel fear. He felt a quiet readiness, a strength that came not from anger but from experience. He knew that the next steps would be crucial, and he would face them with the same calm determination that had guided him through so many challenges before. In that moment, as he looked out over the street, he felt the truth of his own words. No one could break him, not now, not ever, because he carried a strength that went far beyond what anyone could see. Life slowly settled into a fragile rhythm after the attack on his home. He kept busy with work, repairs, and simple routines, but the memory of that night never left him. Each time he passed the broken window, he felt a twinge of anger and a quiet determination growing inside him. It wasn't fear that motivated him. It was a sense of responsibility, a need to protect his home, his life, and the people around him. He had always been a careful observer, and now that skill became sharper. Every sound in the neighborhood, every unusual movement, every unfamiliar face caught his attention. Despite his calm appearance, he often found himself thinking back to a life he had long tried to leave behind. For years, he had been part of something few people could even imagine. He had trained harder than anyone around him, pushed his body and mind to limits most would find unimaginable, and learned to survive in situations that could have ended his life in an instant. He had seen danger in its rawest form, and it had taught him patience, focus, and an unshakable sense of control. The world he had left behind was filled with shadows, silent threats, and moments where a single wrong decision meant disaster. He had joined the Navy SEALs when he was young, drawn by a desire to challenge himself, to test the limits of his body and mind, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. Training was brutal. Every day he faced physical exhaustion, mental strain, and situations designed to break him completely. His instructors pushed him beyond pain and fear, forcing him to discover strength he never knew he had. But the training was more than just physical. It taught him strategy, observation, and the ability to anticipate danger before it arrived. He learned to read people, to notice the smallest detail, and to react with precision when needed. Over the years, he participated in missions that demanded every skill he had. He traveled to dangerous places, often under extreme conditions, carrying out operations that required secrecy, careful planning, and courage beyond measure. Every mission taught him something new: how to stay calm under pressure, how to control fear, how to act decisively in the face of chaos. He had seen people falter and fail, and he had learned that survival depended on a combination of preparation, discipline, and inner strength. But he had never sought fame or recognition. After leaving the military, he wanted something different, a life where he could walk down the street without fear, a life where he could feel the sun on his face without wondering what danger might be waiting around the corner. He wanted normalcy, and he worked hard to create it. He chose a quiet neighborhood, a simple job, and built relationships with people who valued him for who he was, not for what he had done in the shadows of war. He had left that life behind, or at least he thought he had. The attack on his home reminded him that the world could be cruel, that hatred existed even in places he thought were safe. He realized that his past would always be a part of him, whether he wanted it or not. The skills he had learned, the training he had endured, the strength he had developed, all of it would be needed again. But he would not rush into action. He would observe first, plan carefully, and act with purpose. That was the way he had survived in the past, and it was the way he would handle this situation now. During the day, he moved quietly through his life, greeting neighbors, doing his work, and repairing the damage to his home. At night, he reflected, thinking through every detail, every possibility. He remembered the nights spent in harsh conditions, training in the cold, in the rain, in darkness, where every mistake could be fatal. Those memories were painful, but they reminded him of his capability, his ability to remain calm, focused, and ready. He knew that he could handle what was coming, but he also knew that he needed to be patient. Impulsiveness had no place in situations like this. He thought about the people who had harmed his home, the gang that had tried to intimidate him. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a simple act of vandalism. To him, it was a challenge, a test of control and awareness. He began quietly gathering information. He watched the streets, noticed patterns, and took note of the gang's behavior. He learned their timing, the way they moved through the neighborhood, and even the small habits that gave away their presence. All of this was done without raising suspicion. To the outside world, he was calm, ordinary, a man who had been through an unfortunate event and was now repairing his home. But behind the calm facade, he was planning. He was not planning revenge in the way some might imagine. He was planning strategy, safety, and awareness. He wanted to ensure that no one could harm him, his neighbors, or his home again. Every lesson from his past, every skill he had honed was being applied now. He relied on observation, patience, and careful calculation, understanding that control was more powerful than anger. Despite the seriousness of the situation, he found moments of reflection that were almost peaceful. Sitting on his porch at night, he would look at the stars and remember the long nights of training, the silent moments before a mission, the clarity that came from focus and preparation. He remembered the value of patience, how waiting and observing could turn a dangerous situation in his favor. That clarity gave him calm, even as the threat of the gang lingered in the background. He also remembered why he had left the military. It was not because he lacked courage or skill, but because he wanted a life that allowed him to be present in the world in a different way. He wanted connections, peace, and the ability to live without constant danger. That desire had led him, here to this quiet neighborhood, to a home he loved and a life he had built with care. The attack had reminded him that even in peaceful places danger could appear, but it also reminded him of his own strength and capability. Over time, he started preparing his home in small, discreet ways. Not traps or weapons that would alarm neighbors, but adjustments that increased his awareness and security. He reinforced doors and windows, installed better lighting, and made subtle changes that allowed him to notice movement or unusual activity. Each change was methodical, deliberate, and quiet. He wanted to feel in control, to ensure that he could respond to any threat with intelligence rather than panic. The local community began to notice small changes in him. He was still friendly, still polite, still approachable, but there was an unmistakable confidence now, a sense that he was aware of everything around him. Some neighbors felt reassured. Others were curious, but no one could guess the full truth. They did not know about his past, about the years of intense training, about the missions that had required courage, skill, and discipline beyond anything they could imagine. He remained a mystery, calm and composed, yet quietly preparing for what might come. Even as he planned and observed, he never allowed fear to take root. Fear had no place in his life. He understood it, respected it, and used it as a tool, but he did not let it control him. That control, that discipline, was a gift from his past experiences. It allowed him to remain calm, to act with precision, and to respond with intelligence. He knew that the next steps would be crucial, and he prepared for them carefully, using everything he had learned over the years. At night, he reflected on what kind of man he had become. He was no longer a soldier in the military sense, but the discipline, the focus, and the courage remained. He had learned that strength was not always about force. Sometimes it was about patience, observation, and careful action. He had learned to balance calmness with readiness, kindness with vigilance. That balance was his greatest strength, and it would guide him through whatever challenges lay ahead. He also thought about the people around him, neighbors, co-workers, friends. He wanted to protect them without drawing attention, without causing alarm. His actions were not about ego or recognition. They were about responsibility, about using his abilities to ensure safety and justice. That perspective gave him purpose, and it reminded him why he had worked so hard to create a normal, peaceful life after leaving the military. As the days passed, the threat of the gang lingered, but he remained calm, patient, and strategic. He observed, collected information, and prepared quietly. He knew that eventually the confrontation would come, but he was determined to face it on his own terms. Every skill from his past, every lesson he had learned was now part of his plan. He was ready to protect his home, his life, and his neighborhood, but he would do so with intelligence and control, not with rash anger or fear. He spent hours reflecting on the meaning of strength. Strength was not just physical skill or the ability to fight. It was the ability to remain calm under pressure, to act wisely, and to protect what mattered most. That was what he carried with him every day. That was what made him more than just a quiet man living in a peaceful neighborhood. That was what made him someone who could face danger without fear, who could observe and respond with precision, and who could remain human, kind, and patient, even in the face of hatred and violence. And so, life continued quietly with him, maintaining his routines, observing the neighborhood, and preparing for what might come. The attack on his home had not broken him. It had reminded him of who he was, what he was capable of, and the importance of remaining calm, focused, and ready. The neighborhood saw a man who was polite, friendly, and calm. But beneath that exterior was a man shaped by extraordinary experiences, a man who had faced life and death situations and survived, a man who was now preparing to face a new challenge, one that would test not only his skills but his patience, his intelligence, and his strength of character. After spending days quietly observing his neighborhood, he realized that waiting and watching would only get him so far. The people who had attacked his home were not acting randomly. They were organized, bold, and careless in a way that made them dangerous. But danger did not intimidate him. He had faced it many times before and knew that careful planning, patience, and attention to detail were far more powerful than rash action. He understood that before he could confront them, he needed to know everything about them, their habits, their weaknesses, and the ways they thought they could control the situation. Each morning, he would leave for work with a calm demeanor, smiling politely at neighbors and coworkers, acting as though nothing had changed, but his mind was always alert, noticing small details that most people would ignore. He noticed the way certain cars parked in the neighborhood, the timing of footsteps at night, and even the patterns of lights and windows across the street. Every small observation became part of a larger puzzle he was quietly assembling. He never let his awareness show. No one suspected that beneath his calm exterior was a man capable of extraordinary action. He began documenting everything he noticed. Small notes, subtle observations, patterns that seemed trivial to anyone else suddenly became critical pieces of information. He studied the streets, the timing of the gang's appearances, the routes they favored, and even their routines. It was as if he was putting together a map that would reveal their behavior in a way they could never anticipate. Observation and analysis were tools he had mastered during his years in the military, and now they were his best weapons in a situation that could have seemed overwhelming to anyone else. Even as he collected information, he stayed patient. He understood that confronting the gang too early could be dangerous. Acting on impulse could reveal his abilities, and that could escalate the situation in ways that were unnecessary. He had learned in the past that the right timing was everything. Waiting for the right moment, striking with precision, and maintaining control of the situation was the difference between success and disaster. That knowledge guided every decision he made. He also began making subtle adjustments to his home and surroundings. Not obvious traps or weapons, but small changes that increased his awareness and security. He repositioned lights to eliminate shadows where someone could hide, reinforced doors and windows, and even rearranged furniture to create better visibility from the inside. Each change was deliberate and strategic, giving him an advantage without drawing attention. To anyone looking in, it might have seemed like careful maintenance, but to him, it was preparation, ensuring that he could respond effectively if the gang returned. During the evenings, he would watch the streets from his porch or from the shadows near the edge of his property. He noticed how the gang operated in groups, how they communicated, and even small behaviors that revealed their confidence and recklessness. They believed they could intimidate him because they thought he was ordinary, unaware that the calm man they observed was far more capable than they could imagine. That realization made him confident, but he never let arrogance cloud his judgment. He knew that control and strategy would always be more effective than aggression. As days passed, he started connecting the patterns he observed. He noticed certain members of the gang arriving at specific times, using the same routes, and leaving signs that others could see. These patterns, seemingly insignificant, were exactly the kind of details that he could use to anticipate their next move. He thought through different scenarios, imagining how they might attempt another attack and how he could prevent it without escalating the situation unnecessarily. His experience had taught him to think multiple steps ahead, and he applied that knowledge with quiet focus. He also began considering the psychological side of the situation. The gang believed that intimidation would make him act out of fear or anger. They underestimated patience, observation, and self-control. They had no idea that every action, every decision he made was deliberate and guided by a lifetime of training. That knowledge gave him an advantage. While they acted impulsively, he planned deliberately. While they relied on fear, he relied on preparation and calm execution. That contrast would prove to be decisive. Even as he worked and observed, he never lost sight of his humanity. He remained polite to neighbors, engaged with coworkers, and maintained routines that kept him grounded. This was not just about survival or strategy. It was about maintaining balance in life, about not letting hatred or violence consume him. He understood that part of strength was kindness, calmness, and the ability to remain human even in dangerous situations. That perspective guided him as much as his tactical skills. He also began gathering information discreetly from the environment around him. He listened carefully to conversations he could overhear, observed cars and individuals without being noticed, and took mental notes that would help him predict the gang's actions. Each observation, no matter how small, became part of a larger understanding of the threat he faced. He saw connections that others might overlook, anticipating moves before they were made, always staying several steps ahead. He considered the possibility of involving authorities, but he knew that relying solely on them could complicate matters. The police could help, but they might not act with the precision and timing necessary to prevent another attack. He decided that gathering evidence himself first would give him more control over the situation. He wanted to ensure that if a confrontation occurred, it would happen on his terms, with minimal risk to himself and those around him. Evenings became a time for reflection and planning. He thought about past experiences, missions where observation and patience had saved lives, and how those lessons applied to the present. He reminded himself that control was more powerful than aggression, that knowledge and preparation could neutralize threats without unnecessary confrontation. That mindset kept him calm and focused, preventing fear or anger from dictating his actions. As he continued his quiet investigation, he noticed how the gang adapted to his routines. They seemed to test boundaries, arriving at slightly different times, trying to gauge his reactions. But he remained unshaken, observing carefully, documenting changes and preparing for eventual confrontation. Each small adjustment he made to his behavior and environment reinforced his advantage, allowing him to stay ahead while remaining unnoticed. He also thought about the community he lived in. His neighbors were unaware of the danger, unaware of the threat that had passed through their streets. He felt a responsibility to protect them, to ensure that the gang could not harm anyone else. That sense of duty reinforced his focus, reminding him that his actions were not just about personal safety, but about preserving peace and security for others. Over the next few days, he noticed small signs that the gang's confidence was waning. They were testing, hesitating, and showing subtle signs of uncertainty. They did not know who they were dealing with, and that uncertainty worked in his favor. He remained patient, waiting for the right moment to act, knowing that a premature response could jeopardize his plans. Every detail mattered, every observation contributed to his understanding, and every moment of patience brought him closer to control. He also started to anticipate their next move. Based on patterns, timing, and behavior, he predicted when and how they might attempt another attack. He considered multiple scenarios, thinking through how each could unfold and what actions he would take in response. This level of preparation was not paranoia. It was disciplined foresight, a skill honed through years of high-stakes experience. He felt confident, not reckless, knowing that preparation would give him the upper hand. Even as he focused on strategy, he never lost sight of normal life. He continued his job, maintained routines, and engaged with people in his neighborhood. He understood that balance was essential. He could not let the threat dominate his life completely, and he could not allow fear to dictate his actions. That balance between vigilance and normalcy was critical, allowing him to remain human while preparing for the eventual confrontation. He reflected on the contrast between his quiet civilian life and the danger that now lurked nearby. The gang had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, he was just a man living in a quiet neighborhood, but in reality, he was someone trained to face extreme danger, someone who had survived situations far more threatening than any vandalism or intimidation. That contrast gave him confidence, but he never let it cloud his judgment. He remained humble, patient, and focused, knowing that intelligence and strategy were more effective than arrogance. In the evenings, he would sit quietly, reviewing observations, planning actions, and considering next steps. Each night reinforced his understanding. The situation required patience, vigilance, and careful preparation. He was not rushing, not acting impulsively, and that deliberate approach gave him an advantage over the gang. They acted on impulse, driven by confidence and fearlessness, unaware that every move they made was being observed and catalogued. He realized that the eventual confrontation would not be about brute force alone. It would be about intelligence, timing, and control. He had the advantage, but only if he maintained patience, discipline, and awareness. That mindset gave him calm, reinforcing the lessons he had learned over years of training and experience. He knew that when the time came, he would act decisively, efficiently, and effectively, but only when the moment was right. The days passed, and with each observation, his understanding of the gang's behavior grew stronger. He noticed their weaknesses, their predictable patterns, and the overconfidence that left them exposed. He remained hidden, quiet, and deliberate, preparing for the moment when his patience would allow him to take control. He understood that control, intelligence, and timing would be far more powerful than aggression alone. Even as the threat loomed, he remained calm, focused, and human. He continued to smile at neighbors, engage politely with coworkers, and maintain a life that appeared ordinary on the surface. But underneath, he was prepared, aware, and ready. The quiet man in the neighborhood was not ordinary at all. He was someone who had faced extreme danger, learned discipline and strategy, and was now applying those skills to protect his home, his life, and his community. And so he waited, watched, and prepared, knowing that the next steps would require all his focus, all his intelligence, and all his experience. He understood that the confrontation was inevitable, but he also knew that he would face it with calm, patience, and precision, turning the tables on those who had dared to threaten him. The quiet, careful observation, the patience, and the discipline, all of it would soon make the difference between chaos and control, fear and safety. The tension in the neighborhood grew over the following days. The gang had sensed resistance, though they didn't know the full extent of it. They tested boundaries, moved at different times, and tried to intimidate those around him. Each of their actions was bold, sometimes careless, but he remained calm. He had spent years learning to control fear, to act with patience, and to stay several steps ahead of those who underestimated him. Every move he made was deliberate, calculated, and quiet, designed to give him the upper hand without revealing too much. He had spent hours preparing, making small changes around his home that would give him awareness and security. Every door, window, and corner of the property had been carefully considered. Lighting was positioned to reduce shadows. Pathways were clear so he could move unnoticed, and he had mentally mapped every possible route an intruder could take. Each precaution was part of a larger strategy. To anyone looking from outside, it might have seemed ordinary, but in reality, it was the work of someone who had survived life-threatening situations through preparation and attention to detail. That night, he noticed unusual movement on the street. A shadow slipped along the fences, pausing near a window. The gang had come again, likely testing his home, assessing his reaction. He did not move, did not rush to confront them. Instead, he observed quietly, noting the number of people, their behavior, and how they communicated. Each detail mattered. He had learned to remain invisible until the moment was right, and he was patient. The gang, believing themselves bold and fearless, had no idea they were being studied. He understood the psychology of intimidation. The gang believed fear could control him, that a single threat would make him act recklessly. But he knew that patience and control were more powerful. He had seen situations where those who reacted impulsively failed, and those who stayed calm and calculated prevailed. Every observation he made now would feed into the moment when he could act decisively, safely, and effectively. He also began setting subtle traps not to harm, but to destabilize the gang if they returned. These were simple measures, small obstacles that would force them to move differently, lights positioned to expose movement, sounds that could alert him, and careful use of shadows to give him cover. Each adjustment was deliberate, a way to ensure that if the gang attempted another attack, they would be walking into a controlled environment where he had the advantage. Days passed, and the gang's frustration became evident. Their movements were no longer as confident, and there was hesitation in their steps. They did not understand the man they were targeting. To them, he was just a quiet neighbor, someone they assumed could be intimidated easily. They had no idea that every step they took was being watched, every pattern recorded, and every weakness noted. Their overconfidence was exactly what he had anticipated, and he remained patient, knowing the right moment to act was approaching. One evening, he noticed that the gang had coordinated a larger attempt. There were more people than before, moving together, likely thinking they could overwhelm him. He did not panic. Instead, he went through the mental preparation he had practiced countless times in the past, assessing the environment, anticipating moves, planning contingencies, and staying calm. Each thought, each calculation, reinforced his confidence. He knew he could handle them. but he would do so on his own terms, minimizing risk while maintaining control. The confrontation began subtly. A figure approached his yard, moving cautiously, but unaware of the precautions he had set. The lights, the positioning of objects, and his careful observation all gave him an advantage. He did not strike immediately. Instead, he allowed the gang to make small mistakes, knowing that each error would make it easier to gain control. His presence was invisible, yet he was ready, aware, and focused. He thought about the lessons from his past missions where patience had been the difference between life and death. He reminded himself to stay calm, to act decisively only when the time was right. Anger had no place in his actions. Every move was guided by logic, training, and the need to maintain safety for himself and others. He watched as the gang's confidence wavered, realizing they had miscalculated, that their attempts to intimidate had not worked. Their mistakes were opportunities, and he was ready to use them. The first moment of action came when one of the gang members stepped into a trap he had subtly set. It was not dangerous, but it caused confusion, a pause in their movement. That pause was all he needed. He revealed himself, calm but authoritative, moving with precision and confidence. The gang froze, realizing too late that the man they had underestimated was not ordinary. His demeanor, his controlled movements, and the quiet confidence in his actions made them hesitate. They had no idea what they were facing, and hesitation was their first weakness. He did not attack recklessly. Instead, he used his training to control the situation. Each movement was deliberate, designed to maintain dominance without unnecessary harm. He guided the gang into positions where they could be managed, neutralizing their threat through strategy rather than brute force. It was a display of intelligence, discipline, and calm control. They had expected fear, but they encountered skill, patience, and confidence. The gang members attempted to flee, but he anticipated their movements. Every escape route had been considered, every possible reaction predicted. He maintained control, using his experience to ensure that none of them could harm anyone or escape easily. His actions were precise, calculated, and effective. He did not act out of anger. He acted out of responsibility and strategy, using his abilities to restore safety. During the confrontation, he remained aware of the environment around him. Every sound, every shadow, and every movement was observed. He used the surroundings to his advantage, guiding the gang into positions where they were exposed, uncoordinated, and unable to intimidate him. Each member realized, with growing fear, that they were facing someone far beyond what they had imagined. Their confidence crumbled as they understood they had underestimated him completely. Despite the intensity of the moment, he never lost his calm. He spoke when necessary, giving clear commands and maintaining authority. The gang, confused and scared, realized that aggression alone would not work. They had assumed they could intimidate a man who seemed ordinary, but the quiet neighbor they thought they knew was a strategist, disciplined, and fully capable of defending himself and his home. Neighbors who might have seen shadows or movement were unaware of the details. From their perspective, it was a strange night, unusual sounds and then quiet. But they did not know that the man they considered calm and ordinary had faced danger and controlled it with precision. His actions were deliberate, ensuring safety without unnecessary conflict. He had neutralized the threat not with chaos, but with intelligence, preparation, and experience. The confrontation ended without serious injury. The gang realized they had been outmatched, their arrogance and assumptions destroyed by someone who combined skill, patience, and strategy. They retreated, leaving behind the confidence they had carried and the control they had hoped to exert. The man remained calm, observing to ensure they had truly left. His home was secure, his neighborhood protected, and his patience and preparation had proved effective. Afterward, he walked through his home, checking every detail, ensuring that the situation was fully under control. He reflected on how close danger had come, yet he felt no fear, only clarity. The confrontation had confirmed what he already knew. Patience, observation, and preparation were more powerful than aggression and fear. He had protected his home, his life, and his neighborhood, and he had done so without unnecessary conflict, relying instead on intelligence, skill, and calm action. As the night settled into quiet, he realized how much his past had prepared him for this moment. His training, experiences, and the discipline he had learned over years were not just memories. They were tools he could apply to any challenge. The gang had believed they could intimidate him, but they had underestimated patience, strategy, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. He had demonstrated that true strength was not in recklessness or anger, but in careful, intelligent action. In the days that followed, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The gang did not return, having learned that their intimidation would not work. Neighbors began to sense a subtle change, though they did not know why. The quiet man who had lived among them was still polite, still approachable, but there was now an undeniable confidence in his presence. He had protected what was his, and he had done so with intelligence and restraint. He spent the following nights reflecting, ensuring that any remaining threats were fully understood and mitigated. He reinforced his home further, but subtly, maintaining normal appearances. He knew that control, awareness, and preparation were ongoing responsibilities. Peace was not simply restored by one action, it was maintained through vigilance, intelligence, and patience. Though the immediate danger had passed, he did not become complacent. He remained aware, observing patterns and prepared for any future threats. His calm, human approach ensured that he lived safely while maintaining relationships, routines, and a sense of normal life. He had proven that a combination of intelligence, patience, and experience could overcome fear and aggression. He had remained human, kind, and focused, even in the face of danger, and that balance had allowed him to protect his home and community effectively. And so, life began to settle again. The threat had been neutralized, but the lessons of vigilance, preparation, and patience remained. He continued his routines, his quiet observation, and his engagement with the community, always aware but always calm. The confrontation had been a test, and he had passed not with anger or recklessness but with intelligence, discipline, and controlled action. The neighborhood had survived, and he had proven that true strength was measured not in violence, but in calm, deliberate, and human-centered courage. The neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The streets, once filled with tension and suspicion, were again calm. Children played freely, neighbors waved at each other, and the evenings were peaceful. But the man knew that the sense of calm was fragile, and he remained vigilant. He had learned over the years that peace was not simply given, it had to be maintained. While the gang no longer posed an immediate threat, he understood that safety required awareness, preparation, and responsibility. His home was secure, but he also knew that the lessons of patience, observation, and strategy would remain with him forever. In the days that followed, he reflected on what had happened. The attack on his home, the intimidation, and the eventual confrontation had tested not only his skills but his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. He had faced danger before, but this challenge was different because it threatened the life he had worked so hard to build, the community he cared for, and the sense of normalcy he had fought to create. He realized that strength was not just physical ability, but the wisdom to act with purpose, the courage to remain calm, and the discipline to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. He also thought about the people around him. His neighbors had been unaware of the full danger, but their lives had been touched by it nonetheless. He had watched over them quietly, protecting them without them knowing. There was no recognition or praise to be had, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done what was necessary. That was enough. He understood that true courage was often invisible, carried out in silence without attention or reward. His actions had preserved safety and peace, and that was the outcome he valued most. While the gang had retreated, he continued to strengthen his home and his awareness. Every window, door, and path was carefully considered, and small improvements were made without alarming anyone. His actions were subtle, designed to increase security and maintain readiness. He knew that life could be unpredictable, and while the immediate threat had passed, preparedness was not optional. That mindset, forged over years of experience, allowed him to live calmly while remaining alert, combining normalcy with vigilance. He also began thinking about how the events had changed him. The experience had reinforced lessons he had learned long ago: the value of patience, the importance of careful observation, and the strength that comes from self-control. It had reminded him that even in ordinary life danger could appear, and that his past had prepared him for moments when ordinary skills alone would not be enough. He appreciated the life he had built, but he also recognized that his ability to protect it required both mental and emotional discipline, as much as physical capability. His neighbors began to notice subtle changes in him, even if they did not understand them. He was still friendly and approachable, still polite and calm, but there was a quiet confidence in his presence, a sense of authority and awareness that had not been there before. People felt safer around him without knowing why. Children played near his home without fear, and adults walked the streets with a renewed sense of security. He had protected more than just himself. He had quietly ensured the safety of everyone around him. As he reflected on the events, he thought about the importance of human connection. Despite the danger, he had remained engaged with his neighbors and community. He had not allowed fear to isolate him. He had continued to be present, to interact politely, to maintain the routines that gave life meaning. That balance between vigilance and humanity was essential. Strength, he realized, was not just about defending oneself. It was about preserving kindness, maintaining empathy, and living in a way that uplifted others even in the face of threat. He also took time to consider the psychological impact of what had happened. The gang had assumed that intimidation and fear would control him, but they had underestimated patience, intelligence, and self-control. That realization reminded him that power does not always come from aggression. Sometimes it comes from understanding, preparation, and the ability to remain calm while others act impulsively. That lesson was something he carried forward, a reminder that the greatest victories are often quiet, unseen, and guided by wisdom rather than force. Over the following weeks, life began to feel normal again. Work, routines, and simple pleasures returned. He spent time tending to his home, engaging with neighbors, and enjoying small moments of peace. But he never forgot the lessons of the past weeks. He remained vigilant, maintaining awareness without letting it dominate his life. He understood that true security came from balance, between caution and normalcy, between preparation and engagement with the world. That balance allowed him to live freely while remaining ready for any challenge that might arise. He also thought about the long-term impact of the experience. The gang's intimidation had been a test, but it had also been an opportunity to reaffirm his approach to life. He realized that courage, intelligence, and patience could overcome fear and aggression. He saw that his strength was not just in his physical ability or training, but in his ability to remain calm, act with purpose, and maintain a human connection with the people around him. Those lessons were more valuable than any victory in combat. They were lessons that applied to every aspect of life. Neighbors began to share stories of their own experiences, unaware that he had played a role in ensuring their safety. He listened politely, offering empathy and understanding, but never revealing the full truth. The quiet satisfaction of knowing he had protected them was enough. He understood that heroism often went unseen, that real courage was sometimes carried out without applause or recognition. That understanding shaped the way he continued to live, always calm, always prepared, always human. As time went on, he reflected on his own growth. The events had reminded him that ordinary life could still hold danger, but they had also reinforced his confidence in his abilities. He had faced intimidation with patience, strategy, and discipline, and he had emerged successful. That experience gave him a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of the value of preparation, and an appreciation for the calm strength that comes from experience. He realized that true power was measured not by force but by intelligence, patience, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. He also considered the importance of teaching and sharing lessons quietly. Through his actions, he had demonstrated the value of awareness, preparation, and patience to those around him. While no one saw the full extent of what had happened, the subtle impact of his presence was felt. People felt safer, more confident, and more assured in their surroundings. That quiet influence was a reminder that one could make a difference without seeking recognition, simply through calm, deliberate, and human-centered action. Even in moments of quiet, he reflected on the journey he had taken, from a life of intense training and danger to a peaceful neighborhood where he sought normalcy. He had learned to balance vigilance with humanity. The attack had reminded him that danger could appear at any time, but it had also reminded him of the value of patience, strategy, and calm determination. He understood that true strength was measured not only by skill, but by the ability to remain composed, to think clearly, and to protect what mattered most.